Hello, developers, and welcome to the PHP Architect Community Corner, where we have conversations with members of the web development community. I'm your host, Scott Keck-Warren. Today, we're talking with James Titcumb about the PHP Pi project. James Titcumb is a consultant, trainer, and developer at Rove, working in software for over 20 years. His goal is to improve the quality of software products the teams deliver. Thank you, James, for finding some time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here finally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be able to meet you. So the reason that we kind of have you on is that you're one of the developers for the PHP Pi project. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it is that the Pi project kind of solves, or the problem that it solves?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to sort of rewind a bit and what led up to this. The PHP Foundation is kind of spearheading this project, and I applied the first round for to become a developer for the PHP Foundation, but wasn't successful the first time. And then I applied again. I think it was late 2023. They asked for another round of sort of potential hires, and Roman Pronsky, he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, we've got this idea for a replacement for PECL, essentially, and would I be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm okay at developing extensions. I've worked on a couple, and it's something I was interested in. So this project, the PHP Foundation project, is actually part funded as well by something called the Sovereign Tech Agency, which is a German government funded organization, which is sort of dedicated to trying to develop and keep sustainable the open source ecosystem, which I think is fantastic. And I just want to sort of give a big shout out to the Sovereign Tech Agency for like that laudable effort into open source. It's really awesome. So as I said, Roman approached me about doing Pi when or it was just called the new PECL at the time. We started off, I think early 2024, with the designs. Derek Rethans, was like, yeah, this is what we want to do. We want to essentially retire PECL eventually and, reduce the maintenance burden as well. Cause obviously there's PECL.php.net where PECL extensions are uploaded to, and that's, just where they get downloaded from as well when you use the PECL tool. So this goal was like, okay, let's make something more maintainable. Let's make it, simpler and more modern and all this kind of stuff. Cause PECL, for those of you who don't know, PECL is, this tool for installing PHP extensions. That can be anything from like Xdebug is probably a very commonly used one. But even like PHP itself is comprised of a bunch of extensions which just get compiled into PHP when you build it, if you ever build it by hand. Not many people do these days, but even things like SimpleXML, curl, all this kind of stuff, they're all just extensions to PHP. And PECL is a way of managing those extensions and adding additional ones to your install. And it's based on this old tool called Pair. And Pair is the PHP extension application repository that started, I think from what I understand, back in like 1999, which is a few years before I started writing any PHP. And as you can imagine, this stuff is like really outdated. And these days Composer exists, which does an excellent job of dependency management in PHP. It's for those of us who remember pre-Composer days, that stuff is still revolutionary in my eyes. So we wanted to do a similar sort of thing with PECL, and I'm in good communication with Nils and Geordie, and sort of making sure that we integrate this new Pi tool with Composer. So the workflow is actually very similar and familiar if you use Composer. And instead of installing PHP packages, we're installing PHP modules or extensions. So that's the sort of background of it, I suppose. It's an interesting project, and it's obviously a fairly new project. We're just sort of building it out at the moment, and it's very active development, and I want to start spreading the word. And, when you said, hey, do you want to come talk about Pi? Absolutely. I'd love to talk about Pi. I want to get as many people trying it out as possible so we can get some feedback. And, if there's weird edge cases where it's not working for someone, that's the feedback I want to get from people.
Yeah. I didn't really process that this was being done by the actual PHP Foundation. I just missed that piece somehow in all of my research, but it makes sense because it's in the PHP org on GitHub. So my basic understanding is so the concept is we have Composer for the packages and we have this for our extensions, which Composer requires essentially to install most of the time. And so how does it kind of suck down those extensions? Is it going well, you need the multi-byte string extension, but it's not installed, so we're going to pull all the source code down for that and compile it? Or is it pulling stuff from package managers that exist already?
Yeah. So, at the moment, it's very separate from Composer. It's a separate tool. But it actually uses the same backend. So this is what I mean about sort of Composer integration is in, the Pi tool it actually includes all of Composer, and it plugs into the same sort of way that Composer works. So when you run a command like pi install, vendor / PHP extension name, essentially what that does is it manages its own sort of private Composer JSON. It's called pi.json, and we have one per PHP install. So this is one of the sort of caveats about extensions is they are global to a PHP installation. And obviously with Composer, you install dependencies per project, but it's slightly different here. So what we have is we have a Pi home directory for each PHP installation on your system. Many people might only have one. Some people have lots. I have lots because I develop on lots of different versions of PHP. But, if you're working in a Docker file, you'll probably only have one PHP version. So it will add that requirement to this PyJSON, and then it basically just invokes Composer and says, go and install this thing. And then it will do the dependency resolution, which in practice is really just going to be which version of PHP you're running. There is abilities to do, I depend on libxml, for example, or whatever, but it won't install those dependencies. That's a whole other can of worms that we don't want to go into just yet. And then it will it goes through dependency resolution. Composer does all the downloading from GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or wherever your extension is hosted. And then it will invoke our installer plugin in Pi, which does the normal PHPI's configure, make, and make install steps that you would run if you just cloned an extension repository and wanted to install it by hand. So it's in essence, it just does that, right? It's the PHPI's configure, make, install steps, but just wrapped up in this whole familiar package. But as I said, they're separate tools, right? So you'll have a Composer far and you'll have a Pi far. They operate independently, at least at the moment. People keep mentioning, oh, what about just putting it into Composer? But the way they work is different. Like I said, one is project scoped, one is PHP scoped. So you've got to think about it differently. And very often people will say, hey, well, why don't we make extensions project scoped? And that is actually something I would like to look into. It's not as simple as it sounds. It would be very cool. And it's definitely on my radar, and it's something that we'll look into eventually, but it's not like the headline of this tool, if you like. That's something that we'll definitely work on in future, I think.
Okay, and so it's essentially like we'll check out our project, and then we'll do like Pi install, and then we'll do Composer install, and that'll get like us all up to like to date to where we need to be. So you also mentioned that like, oh, I'm sorry. So you also mentioned that like it's keeping track of like the internal versions of like, so like, cause like we have like, I'm trying to do my best to relate this to Composer because that's what I know best. So there's like a composer.json that says, here's what we want. And then there's the composer.lock file. And it says, here's specifically what we want. And so is there that kind of, can we say, well, right now we're using version 2.1.1 of this extension, and oh, now we need to update those. And so everybody can have like the updated versions, or does it not quite do that piece of it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, there isn't yet a command to do like a bulk update of all of your installed extensions, but that is definitely on the roadmap. That will be added soon. But yeah, you're right. It will track. So when you do Pi install, it will use Composer to figure out what Composer calls a recommended version, and it's in the same way as when you do like Composer require whatever package without specifying a version, it will find out like the latest, maybe best version for your system, for your platform, and add that into your Composer JSON for you. So that's essentially what Pi is doing as well. And it will say, oh, you're running PHP 8.4, so I can get whatever is the latest and do like the circumflex, whatever version, you want, and like the semver operator. And then the next step of that install process in Pi is to invoke Composer to say, hey, do the Composer install, essentially. So that's what it does. It invokes the Composer installer, and that will then go and fetch the source code and, do all the invoke the Pi installer plugin to make the actual compilation steps happen.
Okay, this is a really fascinating concept. It does, because it fixes a lot of problems. You know what I mean? Like it sounds like it's an excellent solution for because Composer deals with like the dependency hell in packages, and this deals with the dependency hell in libraries and I'm sorry, I just blanked on what I was saying. Extensions. Yeah. So then. Wow, this is really fascinating. So like we so like the idea would be that like right now there's like kind of like I use Ubuntu, and there's like a third party person who kind of like maintains the packages for PHP and Ubuntu, and this kind of like replaces that if you have like a high enough level of like, because we could use this for production staging, like all the processes, if we have like the infrastructure for that. Is that kind of like, is that how you see it being used in the future? Is like this controls everything in every location?
I still think there's a place for, there's like the dev.suri.org repo, which, I've used countless times, and he provides all the binaries of extensions anyway. So, that is a great way to install extensions still. I'm not necessarily saying Pi should replace them, but it's kind of like saying, we want to eventually phase out long term. This isn't happening like tomorrow, so don't start panicking. Oh, like we're going to phase out PECL. There's a long road, but I think the goal is that we phase out PECL and retire the PECL.php.net website, because that infrastructure is problematic for maintenance, within the PHP group and the people working at the PHP Foundation, because it's extra maintenance costs and so on. And, but like for the end user, like just using PHP and running their applications, it provides potentially a sort of a new avenue for installing those extensions. And certainly wherever you're using PECL at the moment, it should be more or less, you should be able to just replace PECL install xdebug with like Pi install xdebug/xdebug. Like the package names are slightly different because we're using the Composer format, and the metadata for that, and this is where PECL.php.net becomes sort of redundant in a way, is because that metadata for the packages is now on packages.org. So it's it's still open source, which is nice. It's already got managed infrastructure. That Nils and Geordie are, they've said, yeah, just chuck it on there. It's great. And we liaised a bit. We had to make, they had to make a couple of changes for us, which, they did really quickly, and hats off to them. Thank you, for supporting this. And I think the net benefit is that, installing extensions becomes almost like installing a regular PHP package with Composer. And if you're familiar with Composer, and so many developers are nowadays, it should feel natural, and be like, oh yeah, there's this. I mean, it's doing a slightly different thing, but it's doing it in a very similar way. So it should feel like, as I said, it should feel natural. So.
Yeah, no, I think this is an amazing concept, like to be able to do all these bits and bobs for like this. It definitely brings everything forward, because I feel like I don't usually use PECL, because like we do use like that repository you're just talking about, as opposed to like other things, but we don't really have like good control over that. So we don't know, like sometimes he drops support for things and we aren't expecting it on like older systems. And so like this seems like it would be, well, we have all those pieces now because we can just compile them from source, as opposed to having like that third party that's maintaining them essentially. So that's really cool. Yeah.
And it is also worth bearing in mind, like I don't think these repos like deb.siri.org, the Remy repos for Fedora and Red Hat and so on, I don't think they'll go away, and I don't think they should. It's a different ecosystem, but I'd like to see perhaps this could be used in a Docker file for like a modern version of PHP, and that's certainly, we've started paving the way. And we have a binary only release, like just the file wrapped up in a Docker file, so you can like copy that file into your Docker file already. It's not like a full platform, so it doesn't install like the platform dependencies and everything. That's still up to you. Like, it gives you that control. But I think there's scope here, and what I'm hoping is like the ease of adoption means that people will be less afraid of like, oh, I might need to compile this for some weird platform, like maybe that isn't necessarily supported with binaries, and it should be a case of, oh, I just do PyInstall and it will figure that stuff out, as long as I've got the platform libraries, which is, as I mentioned, that's a very tricky thing, because there's so many different dependency management package, like there's apt-yum, snap, and flatpak, and all this stuff with all these different libraries and ways of doing libraries. And then you've got Alpine, you've got glibc based dependencies and all this kind of stuff. And so when you say, oh, this extension depends on libxml, that's a whole can of worms. Like, well, okay, how did you compile libxml? Did you use like Muzzle, or did you use glibc? Like, and in theory, they're compatible, but it's never 100%, right? They're different stacks. So trying to figure out all those dependency trees for all the different platforms, that's quite a big task, I think. It's nice to think about in theory. And people have said like, oh no, I'm sure this is doable. And I'm like, yeah, it's doable. It's a whole load of work though. So yeah, there's definitely scope there. So.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember like building packages from source in Linux, like from scratch, and like dealing with that kind of thing. It's like you start compiling, it goes, oh, you're missing this library, and then you download that library, and then you have the wrong version. Yeah, so like, yeah, like this is, to me, like this is insane that like we're just like, this is an amazing step forward in like managing all of these extensions. Like, well, I don't have that many, but like all these extensions that exist essentially. So that's really cool. And we'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. Did you know that downtime costs $427 per minute on average for small businesses, and up to $9,000 a minute for larger businesses? That's a lot every single minute. Honeybadger helps you avoid costly downtime and saves you money by combining your tracking, performance monitoring, uptime monitoring, and more into an easy-to-use platform, helping you fix outages faster than ever. Best of all, Honeybadger is free to get started and setup takes as little as 5 minutes. Be sure to bookmark honeybadger.io. That's honeybadger.io. So like right now it's still kind of like in a beta release. It's like a sub 1 release. Like what's preventing it from kind of going to like that 1 release so that like I can get my management to sign off and say, well, this isn't beta anymore?
That's a really great question. I think I think the number one thing I want to do is make sure that, you know, people are going to have a painless experience onboarding onto Pi, and that we've ironed out at least the obvious issues, right? You know, it's all well and good me writing like a load of test suites and running it on my machine, running on like my Windows VM, and you know, a few other people building it and running it. And actually what's quite beneficial is I've mentioned the Remy repos. Remy Colette runs a huge like matrix of different builds and so on, and Pi must have found its way in there, because sometimes when I do a new release, I get a bug report from Remy saying, oh, this thing broke, or like this thing regressed or whatever. So that's always very useful. But I suppose it's that balance of getting enough early feedback to be confident enough to say, hey, this is ready for prime time. I don't think we're far off. At least like we're not getting huge issues, or, you know, people saying, oh, this doesn't work on this platform. There are still some extensions. I can't remember off my head now. It's completely gone out of my head, but there are some extensions to like, oh, we would need support for this because we do this slightly differently. We've resolved some of them. Like MongoDB is quite a big one that was an interesting challenge for us. So when we download the source code, we download like GitHub's zip archive, right? That's how Composer usually downloads it. The problem is the MongoDB extension, it actually has a bunch of Git submodules for some library dependencies. So when we download the source code, it doesn't have those Git submodules. It has a .git submodules file, but it doesn't have the .git directory. So it doesn't actually have the true references to the libraries that are needed. With PECL, MongoDB would package up that prior. So it would build all the source code into this zip file and upload that to the releases. So we had a couple of options. We could clone the Git repo instead and do the Git submodule in it. But actually what we figured is, well, let's use the prepackaged source code archive that you already use and you already have a CI pipeline for in MongoDB extension. And Pi can just say, hey, I want to use that instead, and download that source code, which already has all the Git submodule stuff done. And then we just build and compile and install that instead. So it took a bit of sort of back and forth, making sure that we get it right. And I was in contact with the MongoDB devs, who were incredibly helpful and supportive, and they knew that like they weren't necessarily like the top priority, but I got there. We got there in the end, and MongoDB is now supported on there as well. But you know, there's a I think there was I think it was the Protobuf, like the Google Protobuf extension. Was in a subdirectory, for example. And this was a bit simpler to fix. Like, you know, they could put a composer JSON in the root, but the actual extension was, you know, maybe a couple of directories down. So we're like, okay, well, let's just add a directive, to your composer JSON, which would say, hey, build from this subdirectory instead. So, you know, I'm trying to, make sure that all the extensions are onboarded, or as many extensions as possible are onboarded. The simplest ones, which is, you know, the majority of them really, is a case of adding a composer JSON with a specific type, because it's going to be a PHP ext or a PHP ext Zend for a Zend extension. And, you know, you can configure like the extension name, any configure options and things like that you might need for your extension. And then you submit that to packages.org. And that's more or less it. If you want to support Windows, there are GitHub Actions, which Shivam, I thought, has worked on. So you just add those actions into your extension, and it will build the Windows DLLs for you and attach them to the releases when you make them. So that whole process is pretty much covered off as well. Because if you're not aware, the Windows PECL build server, I think it died back in 2022 or something like that. So the Windows DLLs have been somewhat absent. I know Shivam and Derek have been working to try and bring those back. I think they're almost there with it, if not already. I can't remember where we are at the moment, but yeah, they've been working to try and bring them back to make sure that they're on PECL again. But obviously, this being a new tool set, we needed to make sure that the Windows DLLs are available as well. So there's that onboarding path as well, which again, hopefully should be pretty straightforward. And we're looking at bringing support for that to GitLab and hopefully Bitbucket eventually as well, if there's a demand for it. So yeah, onboarding extensions is the big thing to make sure that they're available, and then obviously adoption will be smoother for the general sort of PHP user base.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to me, like that. So like, obviously those are important pieces to have in there for the one release. So I always forget about Windows too, like that there's all these Windows users that are using PHP. So that's definitely a helpful piece. Is there any way that, like, what are ways that people in the community can like help the project other than maybe donating to the foundation?
Yeah, I mean that's a great shout out there. Yeah, supporting the foundation is hugely helpful as well. But really, I think the number one way is just like give it a try. Right, get the latest PyFar and try and install an extension. And if you encounter issues, just report a bug. Give us some context and feedback, and we'll try and address it. And that would be supremely helpful. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to try it in a Docker container like later today. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to direct our listeners to before we say goodbye for today?
Well, I mean, the Pi repository on GitHub, where you can find more about the Pi project itself, the documentation for it. It's on GitHub, github.com/php/pi. Easy URL-ish. So, feel free to check out the documentation. As I said, if you've got any feedback or you encounter some weird issues, unexpected things, just report issues and I'll try and help you as soon as I can.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you again for finding some time to talk to us. It's been a real treat, for sure.
Well, thanks for having me. Cheers.
I have to say another heartfelt thank you to James for all of his time and also for all of yours today. If you're not already a subscriber, make sure you subscribe with whatever your preferred method is and leave us a 5-star review. Maybe share this post with a coworker so they can also learn about Pi as well. This podcast is available both in an audio version on the PHP Architect website, as well as a video version on our YouTube channel. This is Scott Keck Warren for the PHP Community Corner signing off, and reminding you to keep listening, keep coding, and keep reading.